Hello, welcome to the Internet Seriously. I'm Lucien Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Kieran McCarthy in Putney.
Today on the Internet Seriously, we've got three really exciting topics. We're going to be talking about threat signals, and we're going to the Global Anti-Scam Summit next month. We're also talking about Biden, and it looks like he might be banning a piece of software there, and Kieran's very interested in that, and also cyber attacks on hospitals. Thank you. And today, so we'll start with the Global Anti-Scam Summit in Brussels, which, Emily, we're going to next week. I wanted to talk a little bit about threat signals and our DAP.live platform and what we're doing there to try and foster sort of better sharing of threat signals. So it's really interesting because what we're trying to do is reduce the time it takes for threats to exist on the internet. You two are talking later about attacks on the internet and what's happening out there, particularly we're getting attacks on hospitals and things like that. And one thing that the security bods are trying to do, particularly at places like the Global Anti-Scam Alliance in Brussels next week, is talk about how to reduce the time to live of threats online. So one of the things we're looking at is the thing called time to detect. And there are three interesting aspects to this, and I was interested in your views on this. One is that some of the ecosystem players need to be encouraged to proactively use threat signals. So there are people out there providing internet services, domain name providers and hosters, and they're not actually using any threat signals at all. Emily, I thought.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Lucien, because we know that the average life of a cyber attack, when it's really hot, say a phishing attack or so on, it will really all happen in a matter of minutes or hours. And the response is not really within the same time frame for some sectors. In others, you see, for example, in financial services or in the internet service provider communities, they're setting themselves incredibly aggressive targets for response, within a second or a fraction of a second. Whereas in the domain name industry, it tends to be longer, doesn't it, Lucien?
Yeah, so I mean, Kieran, I'm interested in your view of this. Take the domain industry where people are serving domain names like something.co.uk. They're called registrars. Often they receive intelligence about threats on the assets that they're managing by email, sort of days and days later. Why do you imagine that those registrars are not actually proactively looking at those threat feeds and that threat intelligence?
Well, I think the answer is quite simple in that it's quite a low margin business, and there's no incentive for them to invest the time and the energy and the effort to actually create those systems to work that fast. And so to their minds, they're not legally responsible for it, or they might become under new EU regulation. And so it gets resolved. And it doesn't sort of land on their desk as something that affects their business. And so therefore, they tend not to do it.
Thank you.
And there's also sort of like good reasons why registries and registrars might not be the front line, because a lot of the attacks, they would say, are not really in their sphere of control. A pure registrar just places a domain name on the register and might not be involved in hosting that name, might not even have the customer relationship. It might be done through a reseller. So they would say, well, it's not really our fault and we're being targeted unfairly with responsibility for the entirety of cybercrime.
I'm not sure about that whinging and whining. And just full disclosure, I do run a registrar, but I think this sort of, it's not really our fault. I'm interested in the problems on the internet. As a registrar, I would be and should be, because there's contamination. If domain names are involved in attacks, I want to know. Now, the reason why, say I manage a very small registrar, it's on the side relative to the big GoDaddies and stuff like that. It's got 50,000 domains. I don't know what cyber abuse is happening on my stock, because, as Kieran said, there's no money to do security monitoring, and the big feed providers are very, some of them are very expensive, some of the stuff's free, but it's complex. And so what we're trying to do with the DNS Research Federation and DAP.live is to consolidate that data, to bring together data. Now, when we talk about data sharing, Kieran, this gets back to the other thing which the whole industry has PTSD about, and that is data sharing. After Cambridge Analytica, are you allowed to share personal identifiable PII data? Well, we're not talking about that at this level. We're now rebranding it as threat signals. I'm interested in your thoughts about sharing data at all.
Well, I mean, the truth is it's a headache. And the big, it needs to be resolved, but GDPR came in with these fines. It was the first time I think there was literal fines for misusing data. And so if you're running a business, you're going to want to avoid being fined or dragged through a regulator. So it's just much easier to not do it than it is to figure out how to do it. And we need to figure out. The legislation is being used for people to just blanket not do things. And we do need to get back to a place where we share useful data.
Thank you.
And meanwhile, the cyber criminals are winning.
Yes. Well, I've got an interesting example.
Yeah.
So, and finally, our point is to try and differentiate between what I call high quality curated data and what we call threat signals. Now, this is all about trust. If somebody's threatening to attack my family, and I want to know about it. If there's a fire near my house, I want to know about it. Now, if you've got two yobs in the street outside who say fire, you might kind of look out the window. If you've got two hoodlums and an old lady who says fire, yes, there is a fire, you do a bit more. You might actually go outside and have a look around. If you've got the fire brigade who say there's a fire, you get out of the building fast. So it's about signals. You want all that. You want all those soft little signals. And just to give you an example of the difference that we're finding, we run a service called Trust Checker, where you can check for high quality threats. Now, at the moment, it's all Euro 24. We've got no reports of threats on Trust Checker for that string in the sort of abuse, phishing, malware space. However, on Scam Advisor, we've got 36 reports of around that string of Euro 24, and some of them are sharing bad websites on the same IP address space. So we're getting quite a bit technical there. But what we're saying is there's signs of low quality basic threat signals in that space, but there isn't high quality screenshotted reports. And this is the problem. And what we want is everybody to get all the information in a collated way. We've got the same thing for Taylor Swift. We're not seeing official reports of deep phishing and malware attacks on that space, but we're getting a lot of signals. And as a Swiftie, I'm very interested in that brand being abused by people out there.
I'm sceptical about Lucien's claim to be a Swiftie.
No.
Sing one Taylor Swift song, Luce.
Oh, that's not fair.
Even name a Taylor Swift song. Kieran, can you?
Taylor Swift's song "Red" that she did with Alison Krauss there, and also
you saw that because you like Alison Krauss.
And also her other song, which I was listening to the other day, which was "Why Do You Have to Be So Mean."
What about you? Are you a Swiftie, Kieran?
No, I'm not. I mean, I appreciate that people love her music, but I've occasionally listened to it. My daughter's not into it, and it's not for me.
Oh,
but I recognise it's well put together, and she's clearly an extraordinarily talented woman.
Just to say, the Internet Seriously podcast is distancing itself from Kieran McCarthy's personal views there about Taylor Swift. Just how sad we feel about that, and also the Lib Dem party as well, presumably. So, Kieran, on to you. Biden and Kaspersky Software, what's that all about?
Yes, well, so Biden, I mean, it's not, I doubt if Joe Biden knows what Kaspersky software is, but his administration is banning Kaspersky software, Kaspersky malware software. A lot of people use it at a certain point in time, less so these days. And the US government is saying that it's a threat to national security. Obviously, this kind of software has pretty good access into people's systems because its whole job is to provide security and stop malware.
Sorry, just to
and
be
they're
clear.
saying that this information could be fed back to the Russian government, and so therefore they're blocking the sale of it from in a month's time, 20th of July. And then also the thing that worries me is they're going to block software updates, i.e., updated signatures for malware, etc., in September. So if you have Kaspersky software in the US, it will stop being updated in September.
Wow.
But
So
surely that
what
is...
worries me about that is that's distorting a market. That's
Yeah.
deciding
It's
winners
also-
and losers in a market.
It's also such an adverse cybersecurity outcome because,
Yes,
we know
yes.
like the only thing that, if you can ever get users to patch their software, you're going to be at least winning a little bit on cybersecurity. But that just seems so perverse. It seems like such, it's a bit like the Huawei 5G narrative or the TikTok bans where all of the concerns sound plausible, as you say, Kieran.
Well, but I don't know.
The access to the system is, for any virus software to work, it's got to have really privileged access everywhere. And it's the same with 5G. You think, well, this sort of technology is going to have plausible security risks. But it also sounds like protectionism. It also sounds like geopolitical positioning and the use of sort of trade barriers in order to create a commercial advantage. And my worry on that level is also about the sort of the fragmenting trends. We always think, oh well, can the internet continue to hold together in heightened geopolitical tensions? And it's not just one side of those tensions that might be dragging the internet towards fragmentation. I think often I'm seeing a lot of those trends coming from the US and others.
I have mixed feelings about this, and that I do remember in my old days of using Microsoft computers, I would need to use Kaspersky a lot. The Microsoft computers, sorry, those I don't want to get into those platform wars at the moment, but they we found that Kaspersky kind of, as developers, slowed everything down even more. But I still feel like, well, should we be using Russian security services at all at the moment? And so I know it's complex. How much it is the internet versus operating system protection, I don't know. Anyway, a fascinating discussion. So next, while we're on that sort of internet and attacks, Emily, we're going to talk a bit about cyber attacks in hospital. But first of all, we're on the Tech Room 101 section.
Ooh.
101. This is where we choose something to do with internet or technology in general, and we put it in our Room 101, which is just a hatred room. It's where we want to bury something and we don't want it to be there anymore. We've had one from me, which was cookie notices, and I think that's the winner so far. But Emily, what's your Room 101 choice?
So my Room 101 choice is AI and the arts. Okay, let me just get something out there first of all. I'm really excited by artificial intelligence. We use it in our research. And I feel incredibly excited about AI as a way of helping to solve really horrible, complex problems like health conditions, climate change. But why do technologists want to prove the value of something by going for the arts? The arts, which is such, I declare an interest too, having had a background in the arts and knowing how really difficult it is for people to get started and make a career there. Why do you have to show, and what is the purpose of a Beethoven symphony completed by AI, or a Rembrandt painting painted by AI, or even AI beating the world champion in a game like Go. What is the whole point of that? And you can see the disruptive consequences of it in the sort of artist strikes and the movie industry has been affected by. So, I know that the arts also has a history of sort of putting its arm around technology and using technology in creative ways. But I feel like the replacement of artists by AI is such a pointless and stupid thing to do. That's my Room 101.
I agree with you. Just to give some devil's advocate here, and just because we're meant to just love AI at the moment. Kieran, do you like AI art? Can you tell the difference?
I do like it, and I use it. So, for example, whenever I try and come up with graphics and graphical ideas, I found these days the first place I'll go is an AI engine, and I'll type in the idea that I have in my head, and then a little bit like having a very good graphic artist, but significantly faster and cheaper. It'll pop up 20 different ideas, and then I go, oh, that's what I want to do. And then typically what I've been doing, although I wonder how long it will take, is the AI adjusting AI images is quite hard, and they're not very good at it. But the initial sort of spark of inspiration of like, oh, that's what I want, can be done, and then you get an actual human graphic artist to make it exactly how you want. So I love it from that perspective. It sort of enables you to come up with creative ideas. I do worry a little bit that we're just going to be creating AI films and AI images and AI music, and it's all going to be a bit rubbish. It's going to be like living in the 80s forever.
So Kieran's talking about using it to seed ideas, and you've talked with your research team, Emily, about using AI or chat to give you some rough bones. Do you think there's a context for that?
I do, absolutely. And the way
Beethoven's symphony to give Beethoven a head start.
Okay, so there are two things about the Beethoven symphony thing, which is a real example. So, Beethoven was such a creative and what you'd call a kind of really disruptive innovator. Think of his Ninth Symphony, where he introduced a choir in the final the final movement, and it just completely electrified audiences at the time when they first heard it. Whereas AI, in the way that we're currently experiencing it, is a product of everything that has gone before, which is ultimately, it might create something by accident, but it doesn't have that arrogance of the creative artist, the Beethoven, for example. And I remember listening to an interview with Benny and Bjorn from ABBA about their early days of writing, and they were saying, in those days, and it was partly about the sort of the difference between copyright protection as well. In those days you could have a hit and then go away fully funded on your revenues for a couple of years and learn how to do your art. And I think part of quality art is about what you choose to throw away as well as what you decide to keep, and that is the contribution of the artist who reaches into us and enables us to understand our feelings and understand the world in a different way.
You see, I knew this was going to happen, that we asked Emily for her Room 101, because we're rehearsing this for our guests that we're going to have on the show when we're on the podcast, when we're doing our live streaming. And I knew that the Room 101s, those sort of questions, are much more interesting. Though, back to something serious on the internet, seriously, cyber attacks on hospitals. I mean, that is pernicious, isn't it? Emily, that was your actual chosen serious subject.
But I think, Kieran, you were watching this as well, and so the background is that sensitive data has been stolen from NHS provider Synovis, which provides the pathology for blood tests. So that is a sort of service that absolutely runs through every single intervention, whether it's operations or whether it's sort of simply finding out what's wrong with people. Ransomware attack. it's been identified as the work of a Russian group called Kieran. An example really of a supply chain attack, Kieran, and exposes once again the vulnerability of public sector, particularly the health service in the UK. What were your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, it worries me in that these aren't precisely targeted attacks. They just shut the malware out in every possible way they can. And occasionally, I mean, we hear about these things because they hit things that worry the hell out of us, like thousands of operations being cancelled. So it is a problem. And it also ties in a little bit with this Kaspersky banning, because the sort of information that you would, if this is indeed what happens, and the Russian government pulls information from Kaspersky's, then that's the sort of information that would be used to get into systems and install malware. So it kind of fits together. I can see it. I would like to see more evidence for it. But this kind of stuff is incredibly disruptive and comes out the blue and causes havoc. And havoc on things that are really very important. So it worries me. And these, hospitals, NHS and schools, they all tend to have fairly good security these days. So we're in a crazy arms race, and hospital appointments being cancelled as a result is a pretty horrific result of that.
I have two comments to this. One is a close person to me actually works in the NHS, and they're just on their knees with security and tech problems, and she's actually trained to use the password that everybody else uses for personal patient records across the whole of a shire, not just in a and she's been told there will be sanctions if she changes that password. So it's completely like the opposite of any kind of security hygiene at all. And this other thing of systemic attack. I've been watching. I mean, my favourite horror show this week is to watch the Horizon inquiry. As an engineer, I just find all of this, the language they're using, this sort of binary conversation about things being really secure or not secure, I just don't think is realistic in this real world. Yep. Software is not like what we call the old elevator software. It's not something you install and it's sealed. It's evolving all the time. And you have to expect failure, you have to rehearse failure, you have to put resources into failure. Kieran, if you're lucky and you get there and the Lib Dems win, and I think it's still 50-50, I think, I hope that the Lib Dems will put as much money into the health service technical systems as other parts of the health service, because these are critical, and you have to rehearse failure, you have to expect these attacks all the time.
Yeah, again, it's that there's a lack of basic technical knowledge in the wider world, and definitely with legislators. I do wonder, like both my daughters they'd have IT lessons and tech lessons, which they teach them the sort of fundamental understandings of some of this. So I do hope that the younger generation, as a rule, has better understanding of how things work technically, and then hopefully we won't end up in quite a bad place. But we're still talking. The Horizon is a great example, an opportunity to sort of educate people about how things really work. And for some bizarre reason, it's not being grasped. We're still talking about the actual technology which was behind all this in the most vague terms. And yet you can have a very extensive discussion about exactly what's happening in Coronation Street involving multiple complexities, and everyone's fine with that. As soon as it comes to actual technology, we say, oh, it's this, or it's insecure. Oh, it's secure. I mean, it's madness. We should be able to talk in more nuance.
Emily, just a last point on this.
Yeah, just a last point on this. I think that, your point, Luce, about the realities of the workplace and how security actually needs to acknowledge that, in a shift-based environment like a hospital where you've got multiple different services needing to access a patient's records in real time, and if they can't, it's a very, very big, maybe a threat to life situation, then I can really understand a fallback to shared passwords. Although as a cybersecurity person, it's a horror story. So you've got to say, well, what is a secure solution for this case? Because it's a very common use case. Multiple people needing access, and an unpredictable range of people needing access to the same record. And, there are definitely ways of doing that more securely. Unfortunately, I think, with a legacy of underfunding, legacy systems, back to the WannaCry example in 2017, the UK National Audit Office report said on 88 trust on-site cybersecurity assessments, none passed. Now, I hope it's different now, but I fear it's not that different.
Fascinating stuff. And there's a good idea for a guest, maybe somebody from the NHS, to come on and talk about the reality of information on there. So another fascinating episode this week of the Internet Seriously. We've been talking about launching threat signals platform DAP.live at the Global Anti-Scam Summit next week in Brussels. We've been talking about Biden banning software like Kaspersky, and finally there's cyber attacks on hospitals. And that's it. Emily, you just wanted to say something.
I just wanted to hear from Kieran how your interview with Nick Clegg went last week.
It was good. He's a very interesting man. Nick Clegg, of course, is former leader of the Lib Dems. He also lives in Putney, where I'm standing.
Oh, I see.
And of course, now he's VP at Meta, so he's quite high up in Facebook. And he's how you would expect him to be, extremely intelligent.
Whenever we mention people who are seed funders and part funders of a number of organisations for us, Meta is one of those. Full disclosure, we have to mention that. But I've never been anywhere near Nick Clegg, Kieran, and perhaps for another show, and maybe we'll get him on. But so I'd just like to say that's it for the Internet Seriously today. Goodbye from me, Lucien Taylor.
Me, Emily Taylor.
And me, Kieran McCarthy.